going to talk about prosecutors. You probably know them from shows like Law and Order or The Good Wife or Fancy Justice Lady who can really pull off a hat. Okay, I made up that last one. Or maybe I'm here from the future to tell you about your new favorite show starring Amber Ruffin in a hat. Prosecutors are so important, they even have their own signature sound. Oh, you know it. That's actually the noise prosecutors make when they orgasm. Scientific fact. But here's the thing. That is also one of the whitest sounds of all time, because it turns out that as of 2019, 95% of prosecutors were white. And man, 95% is so white, it's like, I'd like to speak to the manager white. 95% is front row seats at a Billy Joel concert white. America's prosecutors are so white, they think El DeBarge is a giant Mexican boat. And the racial disparity exists all over the country. But hey, why does it matter? Lots of things are super white and don't really hurt anyone, like living in Vermont or saying, I'll be there in a jiffy. How long is a jiffy, white people? I need a number. So let's talk about why the race of prosecutors matters in 3 parts. First, arrests, then charges, and finally sentencing. We'll start with arrests. Now, I know what you're thinking. Aren't cops the ones in charge of arresting people? Well, sort of. See, there's no point in arresting someone if they're not going to be charged with a crime. And prosecutors have basically absolute power in deciding whether a person gets criminally charged. That's right. Prosecutors have the ability to ruin lives in a split second, like plane crashes or the Cool Ranch Doritos Locos Taco Supreme combo at Taco Bell. But I'm still eating that mug. And there are times when prosecutors choose not to press charges when they clearly should. For example, police wanted to arrest the 3 men who chased and murdered Ahmaud Arbery, but the local DA, Jackie Johnson, wouldn't allow it. Then the case was transferred to this prosecutor who said there were no grounds for arrest. Then they gave the case to a 3rd white prosecutor who still didn't arrest anybody. It wasn't until cell phone video of the murder was released that the state appointed this woman to the job, and she finally charged Ahmaud Arbery's killers. Basically, those white prosecutors treated actual murderers the same way you might treat a dog who pooped on your living room rug. Cover it up, pretend it never happened, and hope that someone eventually comes along and cleans it up for you. Since then, the 3 killers have been convicted by 2 separate juries, and as for whether the prosecutor's office was actually racist, it is worth noting that the first DA actually refused to prosecute the murderers because one of them had worked with her in the prosecutor's office. That's right, the man who was just convicted of a federal hate crime worked for decades in the office of the district attorney. So just like in Scream, the call was coming from inside the house. But arrests aren't the only place where race plays a role, because once you're in custody, prosecutors also get to decide what crimes you're going to be charged with, and that can be biased as well. A Harvard study found that DAs charged black suspects with crimes that carry worse penalties. They ask for higher bail for black defendants, they're less likely to offer black people plea bargains, and they ask judges to sentence black defendants to longer terms in prison. In every single possible way, black people face worse outcomes than white people, which is the opposite of what happens during a line dance. I love it. And even if somehow you are fairly arrested and charged, racism can also play a role in sentencing. Now, I know you think I'm going to give you a bunch of stats about how judges and juries give longer sentences to black people, and that's true, but it's not the most important thing, because over 90% of felony convictions are actually the result of plea deals. And the terms of those deals are offered by, you guessed it, the prosecutors. Oh, good for them, they met someone. A recent New York City study showed that black defendants were more likely than whites to be offered plea deals that included jail or prison time. And it's not just true in New York. Take these 2 Ohio women who were convicted of embezzlement, Carla Hopkins and Debbie Bosworth. Now, first, yes, Debbie Bosworth sounds exactly like the name I would make up for that white lady, but it's also her actual name. Now, Carla stole $42,000, while Debbie, on the other hand, stole almost $250,000. And Carla was sentenced to 18 months in prison, while Debbie was given just 10 months. Just kidding, 6. Just kidding, 0. She was given 0 prison time. These are two women in the same county, in the same court system, who were sentenced within 1 year of one another. I wonder what could have made the difference. Basically, think of making a fair plea deal like singing along to a Jimmy Buffett song. Anyone can do it, but it's gonna go a whole lot better if you're white. It's not applicable to me in Margaritaville.
Yeah.
Is that Jimmy Buffett?
I don't know.
That's fair, you shouldn't. Now, I know I've spent all this time telling you about problems with white prosecutors, and to be fair, we don't know for sure that black prosecutors would fix the criminal justice system. We only know that in studies, black judges showed less of a bias against black defendants, that black cops are less likely to use force, and that juries with at least one black member are less likely to convict a black suspect. Does that mean that black prosecutors will do a better job dealing with racial disparities? How the hell would I know? Because here's the thing, there aren't enough of them to count. But we need to find out, because the next time I hear this, I only want to be thinking about one thing. Sweet, sweet lovemaking. Recently, Marvel Comics introduced a new character named Princess Matoka. Now, if that sounds familiar, it's because Matoka is the birth name of an indigenous woman most of us know as Pocahontas. Now, I know what you're thinking. What a great opportunity to show a historic Native woman for the complicated, resourceful, brave person that she was. Well, instead, they did this. Wow, yeah, first, that's super racist. Second, it's very confusing to literally anyone who has seen a woman in her underwear. Now, in case you're wondering if this was drawn by a man, let me point out that there are 0 bra straps, and she's wearing gold pasties, and yeah, she's holding up a metal orb entirely with the strength of her breasts. Apparently, this comic is set in an alternate universe where Native women exist, but gravity does not. Now, if it's not clear to you why that character is upsetting people, let's take a minute and decolonize your understanding. Native women have been hypersexualized throughout American history, and the consequences have been devastating. According to the Department of Justice, Native American women are 2 to 3 times more likely than women of any other race to experience violence, stalking, or sexual assault. And that is terrifying. The only thing Native women should experience 3 times more than other races is compliments about their incredible community and nation-building skills. Damn. Good job. Good job. Now, instead of focusing on this offensive depiction of Matoka, let's learn about the reality. Now, many of you are probably familiar with her, mostly from Disney's Pocahontas, a movie about a Native woman who falls in love with an English guy named John Smith, saves his life, has a close personal friendship with a raccoon. Of course, almost none of that turns out to be true. I mean, I'm not ruling out the raccoon part. They're adorable, and they seem like great listeners. I don't know who her friends were. But in reality, Matoka was around 10 years old when she met John Smith, and he was almost 30. So instead of this, it would have looked a bit more like this. So, unlike the Disney movie, there was never any kind of romance between Matoka and John Smith because, and this is important, ew. Also, in every portrait of John Smith, he has this facial hair. And whether it's the 1600s or 2022, I think we all would have clocked that mustache as something you don't let around young children. So, Disney was wrong about the romance and the age, although that's definitely not Disney's biggest age-related lie. I'm just gonna say it. There's no way Chip is Mrs. Potts' son. Here is what she looks like when she turns back into a human. That lady is in her late 60s, easy. Now you're telling me she has a kid Chip's age? What kind of secrets are you hiding in that teapot, Mrs. Potts? Now, the movie also says that Matoka snuck food to John Smith and even risked her own life to stop her tribe from executing him, but it turns out those parts probably aren't true either. First of all, according to the indigenous site, Indian Country Today, when the colonists didn't grow enough food for themselves, John Smith actually stole food from the tribe by holding a gun to the heads of village leaders. So natives like Matoka likely gave John Smith food in the same way that a cashier gives all his money to a guy in a ski mask. And As for Matoka saving John Smith from execution, well, historians say that probably didn't happen either. In fact, many deny that he was going to be executed at all. That's right. Native historians have called out the lies, just like I'm going to call out anyone who thinks John Smith is hotter than Kokum. Oh, you are wrong, and I will fight you. You're wrong, and I'm going to fight you. John Smith looks like if Axe body spray was a person. He's the human embodiment of crushing a beer can on your forehead. He's the third to last guy on every season of The Bachelorette. And you know what else? John Smith's bangs are the McDonald's logo. There. That's right, I said it. So why is it that many of us have learned this incorrect history? Well, because America likes stories about Native women that make it look like they welcome Western culture and live happily ever after. The actual story of Matoka is a devastating one. According to Native accounts, she was kidnapped, raped by colonists, and died before the age of 21. And no matter how many adorable raccoons you add, that story sucks. But it's the truth. So for just a second, let's bring back this picture. Now, the writer actually apologized for his depiction of Princess Matoka and vowed to change the name and the design after he was called out on Twitter by Native comic lovers. But I don't want to focus on the writer of that comic. I do want to talk about why it matters. Because continuing to hypersexualize Indigenous women in fiction can lead us to ignore their abuse in real life. According to a 2016 report from the National Institute of Justice, more than 4 out of 5 Indigenous women reported they had been the victim of violence. And 96% of them described their attacker as non-Native American. Even worse, those attackers often can't be prosecuted. That's because a 1978 Supreme Court case called Oliphant versus Suquamish Indian tribe decided tribes have limited authority to prosecute non-tribal citizens. That leaves open a legal loophole where, in some cases, non-natives can enter a reservation, commit violence, and not be held responsible, which is insane. It's like if I went to Florida and kicked a bunch of people in the shins and then I got away with it because I don't live in Florida. That's not right. I should be held accountable or I'll just keep kicking. Poor Tarek. Now, here's the thing. We as artists and consumers have to be extra careful in how we treat Native people because our country has not been. The Amber Ruffin Show is filmed on the traditional land of the Lenape peoples, past and present, and we honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. It is our duty. It's our duty to make sure Indigenous women are depicted with care and integrity, and more importantly, make sure they get a chance to depict themselves. That means supporting Native women in everything from writers' rooms to boardrooms. It means donating to the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center. It means supporting positive Native representation by watching shows like Reservation Dogs and Rutherford Falls. And speaking of support, it also means making damn sure they get all the bra straps they need. This has been How Did We Get Here? Tonight, we're gonna talk about medicine. And just a little tip, laughter is not the best one. If you don't believe me, find someone with a peanut allergy, give them a Reese's cup, and then tell them a knock-knock joke. Knock, knock, they're dead. Now, specifically, we're gonna talk about a practice in medicine called race correction. That's when medical calculations are adjusted based on a patient's race. And race correction can result in disastrous outcomes for people of color. Now, these adjustments affect just about every part of the body. But since we're still in a giant respiratory pandemic, let's start by talking about the lungs. I think of them as the Tia and Tamara of the human body because there are 2 of them and they are very close to my heart. For more than a century, doctors have assumed that Black people have a smaller lung capacity than white people. Why? Well, to understand, we're gonna have to go all the way back to 1851 to meet a man named Samuel Cartwright. Now, I'm gonna warn you, you're going to be really mad at this guy, but you can never hate him as much as his own barber obviously did. Now, Cartwright was a white doctor who decided he was going to investigate, quote, the diseases and physical peculiarities of the Negro race, which is already a red flag right there. It's like when you go on a first date and the guy tells you all his exes are crazy. Chad, the only thing all those girls have in common is you. Now, lo and behold, Dr. Cartwright discovered a bunch of what he called Negro diseases. For example, he insisted he found one called drapetomania that was rampant in the black population. He said that this horrifying disease, and I swear I'm not making it up, induces the Negro to run away from service. That's right. This white man thought that enslaved people were running away because of a medical disease and not, and I'm just spitballing here, because they're enslaved. That's basically like saying, I've discovered a disease that makes a waitress spit in my food every time I grab her ass. I call it dinermania. Also, Cartwright discovered another disease that I'm not even gonna try to pronounce because he made it up, so why should I bother? Cartwright claimed that this disease made enslaved people lazy. That's right. The enslaved people were lazy, not the white people enjoying a mint julep while they did all the work. And the main symptom of this disease, lesions on the enslaved people's backs. Now, I wonder how they got there. And this will probably come as no surprise. Cartwright said the best treatment for his made-up disease was more whipping. That's the worst medical prescription since, well, laughter. So what does all of this have to do with the lung capacity we were talking about earlier? Okay, well, on top of everything else, Cartwright was also the first doctor to measure lung capacity between black and white people. He used something called a spirometer, which looks like a very scientific bong. And he concluded that black people have a lower lung capacity than white people. Now, my instinct would be not to believe anything this reverse Eddie Munster said. But the medical profession went a different way because to this day, spirometers use a race-based correction that assumes that a 10 to 15% smaller lung capacity for black patients. But the actual science on that is very unclear. Race is connected to things like access to healthcare or likelihood of living in polluted areas, things that people of color are more likely to experience. So while there's no evidence that race determines lung health, there is plenty of evidence that racism could. And those are the kinds of things an algorithm does not pick up. Besides, anyone who wants to say that black people have weak lungs should be required to listen to Whitney Houston do this. She tricked us into loving America.
Yeah.
That woman has the lung capacity of 1,000 women and one hot air balloon. Now, why does all this talk of lung capacity matter? Well, because if you think someone has diminished lung capacity, then you're not as worried when they get a respiratory infection and their numbers are lower. You might take longer to get the medical care, which could lead to more serious illness. And all those small decisions add up. For example, according to the CDC, black people are currently hospitalized for COVID at a rate 2.5 times that of white people. So the numbers matter. And it's not just the lungs that are affected by these algorithms, because the racism creeps through all the rest of the body as well. For example, black women have the highest rates of C-section, at least partially because of something called a VBAC score. The VBAC score is an algorithm that estimates the chance a woman has of a successful vaginal birth after she's had a C-section. Think of it like an SAT for your VAG. The VBAC score is important because C-sections are much riskier than vaginal births. And up until just a couple months ago, the VBAC actually automatically said that Black and Latinx women had a higher risk score than white women. That means more women of color were advised to get a C-section, which can be dangerous. But recently, researchers looked into why that was included in the algorithm at all. And like Marjorie Taylor Greene says to herself every morning when she looks in the mirror, get ready for some racism! Because they realized the algorithm was based on an old study that found that being unmarried and not having insurance actually increased the risk. It wasn't race at all, but someone saw a single parent and lack of healthcare access and programmed that into their little algorithm as Black and Latinx, which is so devastatingly racist, I'd like to find whoever wrote it and give them this haircut. But guess what? It gets worse because the American Heart Association has something called a heart failure risk score. That's the score doctors use to predict the risk of death in patients who have been admitted to the hospital. The higher the score, the greater your risk. It's a single number that can change your life. Think of it like the Powerball, except the prize is getting admitted to the hospital. According to the New England Journal of Medicine, the heart failure risk score automatically assigns 3 additional points to any patient identified as non-Black. So basically, think of those points like jokes on an episode of Prairie Home Companion. You're gonna get a whole lot more of them if you're white. Now, what this means for parents is that the algorithm automatically categorizes all Black patients as lower risk, whether they are or not. And that has dangerous results. A 2019 study found that Black and Latinx patients with heart failure were less likely than white patients to be admitted to the cardiology service. That's heartbreaking, literally, and the list goes on. A race-adjusted algorithm makes Black Americans' kidney function look better, even though they have higher rates of end-stage kidney disease. A different algorithm used by hospitals to decide which patients get follow-up care let healthier white patients into the programs ahead of Black patients who were sicker. And the examples are endless, but my point is, hospitals treat people, not numbers. Patients of color deserve to go to the doctor and receive health care without bias, and for doctors to take into account their individual circumstances instead of their race. But until then, every single person who makes one of these racist algorithms should have to get the cart right. This has been How Did We Get Here? First, let's get one thing straight. Ketanji Brown Jackson is qualified to be on the Supreme Court. She went to Harvard Law School. She was a public defender and a Supreme Court clerk and a district judge and a Court of Appeals judge. And she played Ronette in her college production of the musical Little Shop of Horrors. And last I checked, that is exactly what the Constitution requires. But throughout the hearings, there's been one phrase that just keeps showing up.
What do you say to people who say you're soft on crime?
The allegation that Judge Jackson is soft on crime.
We see that she has this tendency to be soft on crime.
Is it even possible for a Black woman to be soft on crime? The Black women I know give the harshest possible sentences for crimes like hooting and hollering or running in and out that door. Let's talk about where the idea of soft on crime came from and why it matters when it's used to tear down a Black judge. To figure that out, let's go back to the 1960s. You know, when you could smoke on airplanes and also in the NICU. The 60s were an interesting time in Southern politics. Let's see if you notice something. Here's the electoral map of the Deep South in 1956. Here it is again in 1960. And now here's 1964. Now, normally, when something turns red that fast, it's because it got stung by a bee. So what happened? Well, in 1961, Republicans created something called the Southern Strategy. The Southern Strategy sounds like a plan to drive across Mississippi without getting pulled over. If you're Black, it's not gonna work. But in reality, the Southern Strategy was a plan crafted by the Republican Party so that they could win the South by getting all the racists to vote for them, which is crazy. Obviously, they can't just put racists in charge of a party and say, we support Jim Crow now. Oh, wait, my bad. That's exactly what they did. In 1964, the Republican Party gave their presidential nomination to Barry Goldwater, a senator who publicly fought against the Civil Rights Act outlawing segregation. He also ruined the name Barry for the next 50 years. And then this guy made it cool again. Yay! Republicans also begged Strom Thurmond to join their party. And bringing in Strom Thurmond to make your political party more racist is like bringing in live grizzly bears to make your dinner party more exciting. The problem is that it works too well. So here's 2 facts about Strom Thurmond. 1, he hated Black people so much, he once gave a 24-hour-long speech to stop them from getting civil rights. And 2, he had a Black daughter with his father's 16-year-old maid and publicly denied her existence for over 70 years. Honestly, I'd rather hang out with the bears. Now, why are we rehashing all of this now? Well, it's because that so-called Southern Strategy echoes to this day. During the 1964 campaign, Goldwater's vice presidential candidate, William E. Miller, gave a speech warning Americans about ruthless mobs. Those mobs were actually Black protesters. And he used a new phrase to describe people who supported them: soft on crime. even though the protesters were not criminals. This was the beginning of decades of Republicans using soft on crime as a euphemism for Democrats are going to let violent Negroes come get you. You know, like how sorry I missed your text is a euphemism for I definitely saw your text but did not feel like answering it. And since then, Republicans have used soft on crime as a euphemism for all kinds of racist stuff. Richard Nixon talked about a war on crime, while internal memos said that their campaign plan was to pit the races against each other. Ronald Reagan worked so hard to prove he wasn't soft on crime that by the time he left office, the prison population had doubled. And George H.W. Bush was so desperate to show America he hated crime that he did one of the weirdest things I have ever seen.
This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park just across the street from the White House. It could easily have been heroin or PCP. It's as innocent looking as candy.
Bitch, what candy are you eating? That looks like a bag of mozzarella cheese. I'm not sure what's worse, the fact that this man brought crack into the White House or the fact that that's not the craziest thing I've seen a U.S. president do. That's his hand and that's his daughter. But here's the thing. The reason Republicans accuse their opponents of being soft on crime is because it works. It's a coded way for Republicans to tell voters, my opponent will not keep black people under control. In fact, the Southern strategy worked so well that it won Republicans the Deep South. And to this day, Democrats have never regained control. So all that brings us back to Judge Jackson. When Jackson is accused of being soft on crime, she gets all the implications that come with it. And to show just how ridiculous those accusations can be, here's Senator Tom Cotton asking the world's dumbest question.
Do you think we should catch and imprison more murderers or fewer murderers?
I don't know, Tom. This seems like something you would figure out without the help of a future Supreme Court justice. Also, why do you look like an adult version of Doug? But why did he really ask that question? It's because he wants to associate this black woman with crime. He's using her in the same way his predecessors have for the past 50 years. Judge Ketanji Brown has been endorsed by the International Association of the Chiefs of Police, the Fraternal Order of Police, and 83 Democratic and Republican former attorneys general. Her brother and two of her uncles served as police officers. And fun fact, the Supreme Court has absolutely nothing to do with punishing criminal behavior. So sure, call her soft on crime, but we know about the Southern strategy, and we know what you're really saying. It's just like a text message that says, sorry, I missed your text. We're not fooled. This has been How Did We Get Here?